Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Janarabha Divaradhari Gopi Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana Jamnatirana Chari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kunja Vihari Gopi Janarabha Divaradhari Gopi Janarabha Divaradhari Gopi Janarabha Divaradhari Gopi Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana
Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana
Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana
Yashodanandana Braja Janarandana
Jamnatirana Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya.
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 Is this okay?
Is the volume on? Is it even on?
It's
Oh,
on.
it is, okay.
It's not cracking the building's foundation, so perhaps that's not sufficient to some. Today we'll hear from Srimad Bhagawatam, Canto 3, Chapter 5, Text 18. We don't have books. That'll streamline things. Maitreya Uvacha Sadhu Prashtam Tvaya Sadhu Prashtam Tvaya Sadhu. Not bad. I'm going to do it again. Sadhu Prashtam Tvaya Sadhu. Wow, you guys are good. You've done this before. Huh? Lokan Sadhu Anugranata Lokan Sadvanugranata Kirtin Vitanvata Loke Kirtim Vitanvata Loke Atmano Adhokshaja Atmana Atmanodhokshajatmana Sadhu Prashtam Tvaya Sadho Lokan Sadvanugranata Kirtim Vitanvata Loke Atmanodhokshajatmana Sadhu Prashtam Tvaya Sadho Lokan Sadvanugranata Kirtim Vitanvata Loke Atmanodhokshajatmana. Others, please.
Sadhu Kristam Tvaya Sadho Lokan Sadvanugrinata Kirtam Vitam Vataloke Atmanodhokshajatmanaha Sadhu Kristam Tvaya Sadho Lokan Sadvanugrinata Kirtam Vitam Vataloke Atmanodhokshajatmana.
Thank you. Synonyms. Maitreya Uvacha. Sri Maitreya said. Sadhu.
Listen on the soul notes, but if you don't speak into the microphone, we can't hear you. Yeah, I did too.
Where am I speaking?
Into
If
the.
not into the mic.
It's Yuri, mic. It does. It's not.
It's aimed right at my mouth.
Well, this mic is kind of doesn't have good range. It has
Yeah,
right?
it's really.
I'm 2.5, 3 inches away, and it's aimed right at my mouth.
Check, syphilis, check.
I was just in
Hello?
And of course, it's captured on video, all this awkwardness.
Yeah, but they're in there listening.
Ooh, Johnny Cash.
Maitreya Uvacha,
Maitreya Uvacha.
Sri Maitreya said,
Sri Maitreya said,
Sadhu,
Sadhu,
all good.
All good.
Prishtam,
Krishtam,
I am asked.
I'm asked
Tvaya, by you.
by you.
Sadho,
Sadhu,
O good one.
Oh,
good
good
one.
Lokan,
Lokan,
all the people.
all the people.
Sadhu Anugranata,
Sadhu Anugranata,
showing mercy in goodness.
showing mercy and goodness.
Showing mercy in goodness.
Showing mercy and goodness.
Kirtan,
Kirtan,
glories.
glorious.
Vitanvata,
Vitanvata,
broadcasting.
broadcasting.
Loke,
Loke,
in the world.
in the world.
Atmanaha,
Atma,
of the self.
of the self.
Adhokshaja,
Adhokshaja,
the transcendence.
the transcendence.
Atmanaha,
Atmana,
mind.
mind.
Translation. Sri Maitreya said, O Vidura, all glory unto you. You have inquired from me of the greatest goodness, and thus you've shown your mercy both to the world and to me, because your mind is always absorbed in thoughts of the transcendence. Responsively, please. Sri Maitreya said,
Sri Maitreya said,
O Vidura,
O Vidura,
all glory unto you.
all glory unto you.
You have inquired from me
You have inquired from me
of the greatest of all goodness,
of the greatest of all goodness,
and thus you have shown your mercy
and thus you have shown your mercy
both to the world
both to the world
and to me,
and to me,
because your mind is always absorbed
Because your mind
is always absorbed
in thoughts of the transcendence.
in thoughts of the transcendence.
Srila Prabhupada's purport. Maitreya Muni, who was Maitreya Muni, who was experienced in the science of transcendence, could understand that Vidura's mind was fully absorbed in transcendence. Adhokshaja means that which transcends the limits of sense perception or sensuous experience. The Lord is transcendental to our sense experience, but he reveals himself to the sincere devotee. Because Vidura was always absorbed in thought of the Lord, Maitreya could estimate Vidura's transcendental value. He appreciated the valuable inquiries of Vidura and thus thanked him with great honor. Om Jnanatimirandhasya Jnananjana Shalakaya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Mukhaṁ karoti vachalam pangum langhayate girim jatkripatamaham bande Shri Gurun Dinataranam. Shri Chaitanya Manobhishtam Sthapitam Yena Bhutale Swayam Rupa Kadamahyam Didati Svapadantikam Pancha Kalpatarubhyascha Kripa Sindhubhya eva cha Patitanam Bhavanebhyo Vaishnavebhyo Namo Namaha. Maitreya Uvacha Sadhu Prishtam Tvaya Sadhu Lokan Sattvan Anugranata Kirtim Vitan Vata Loke Atmanodhokshajatmana. O Vidura, all glory unto you. You have inquired from me of the greatest of all goodness, and thus you have shown your mercy both to the world and to me, because your mind is always absorbed in thoughts of the transcendence. So the other day I noted the attitude behind Vidura's inquiries of Maitreya, and it was one of submission and actually also service. Especially we see here in this verse Maitreya's attitude in response, and that is one of very deep gratitude for the service given to him by Vidura of chanting the glories of the Lord, as he has heard and experienced that himself. So we saw that submissive attitude throughout the whole series of questions that Vidura submitted to Maitreya. And now we see Maitreya expressing his gratitude for that service attitude, for that mental and emotional immersion, for Vidura's mental and emotional immersion in topics of Krishna. So he finds this a great opportunity. So he's congratulating him on his questions, but he's also expressing his gratitude. He says, you've inquired for me of the greatest of all goodness, thus you've shown your mercy both to the world and to me. Through these inquiries. So devotees are very, when they have an opportunity to go into their hearts and to glorify Krishna according to their understanding, they're very grateful whenever that opportunity comes. So sometimes devotees act as though I see it as some sort of burden that at the moment I give classes 3 times a week here and a few times a week elsewhere. But actually it's not, that's my life. I don't have anything else. So when somebody asks me a question or shares a misgiving with me or something like that, it gives us an opportunity to talk together about Krishna Katha. And that's really a blessing for me. So these opportunities are also a blessing. I have to immerse myself, and then I have to really open my heart. I have to immerse myself, first of all, in the sense of the verse and Srila Prabhupada's purport and the different places they might take us. And I have to open my heart to that. And then I get to practice tolerance by putting up with all this hullabaloo. I just read something yesterday from one of Prabhupada's godbrothers, Swami Shivananda, who said, I hate all hullabaloo. He didn't like all the trappings. I guess he had taken sannyas, and then when he went back to the West, he was living in Sweden, he says, I'm not going to dress like a sannyasi, I'm just going to dress like a Nor. I hate all hullabaloo. So all the fuss, all the hoo-ha that goes with that, with this stuff, can be a bit something to tolerate. So having this thing rubbing up against my chin also. So these are all great opportunities for us, and devotees, to the extent that we're sincere, about our service see these as great opportunities. And we see a couple of other examples in the Bhagavatam where Shukadeva Goswami expresses his gratitude, his congratulations, and his gratitude to King Parikshit for his inquiry. So one is at the very beginning of the second canto. So we remember, those of us who were here, as we wrapped up the first canto of the Bhagavatam, then we hear the circumstance of King Parikshit being cursed by Shingi, the son of Shamika Rishi, unqualified Brahmin boy, unqualified in the sense that he didn't have the experience of how to use what Brahmatejas he had attained through his service to his father. So he inappropriately cursed King Parikshit. Of course, we saw that Parikshit didn't take it as a bother. He took it as a blessing. He was already just about to leave home, or had just left home. And along the way, he heard about the curse, and he just thought, perfect, cool. That's, seems perfectly appropriate to me. That kind of that means that I don't have to, that the austerity isn't going to be prolonged. It's not going to be protracted for a very long time. It's only going to be 7 days, so that's cool. So he submits his questions. He sits down on the bank of the Ganges to fast and meditate on Krishna until his last breath. And Shukadeva Goswami happens along. Those are air quotes for those of you in audio land. Shukadeva Goswami sits down in front of the king and basically, kind of entertains questions. Any questions? Anything on, what is it Facebook says? What's on your mind? So King Parikshit shares with him what's on his mind. He says, what's the prime duty of a human being? Or, Mother Krishna.
Oh, what is the duty of the man who's about to die?
There you go.
For those about to
She's
die.
usually ready for that cue.
Yes.
Sorry, I didn't mean to compete with you there. And he submits his question, he submits his question very humbly to Shukadeva Goswami, recognizing his qualification for providing an appropriate answer. You want to be reminded of how Shukadeva responded? You might as well say yes, because that's my intention anyway.
Yes.
Whether you want it or not. Shukadeva Goswami said, "My dear king, your question is glorious because it is very beneficial to all kinds of people. The answer to this question is the prime subject matter for hearing, and it is approved by all transcendentalists." In other words, God, thank you. What a wonderful question. And it shows that you're paying attention. You're on the ball. You're right here with us. And it'll be my...
Jai Shri Pantataka Ki.
I deferred to you on that one, because it's your thing. So, he says, I can't, essentially what he's saying here is I couldn't possibly think of a better question. And I couldn't think of a greater blessing for myself than to have somebody submit a question like that to me. And he says, it's very beneficial to all kinds of people. And in his commentary on this verse, Srila Vishwanath Chakravarti Thakur says, this pretty much calls to mind Shukadev's response to Parikshit's inquiry at the very beginning of the 10th canto. Very beginning of the 10th canto, Parikshit asks Shukadev very pointed questions, specifically about Krishna's pastimes. How was it that he left his the home of Vasudeva and Devaki, and what are the things that he did when he was living in Vrindavan, and how was it that he came to leave Vrindavan and go to Mathura, and so on. A series of questions all focused on, okay, all this other stuff is really nice, but now let's talk about the real thing. Please tell me specifically about the pastimes of Krishna, the Supreme Personality of Godhead. And this kind of harkens back to the phrase that we see in the 3rd chapter of the Bhagavatam. Vadanti tattvam vidas tattvam, well, the one that says all these different incarnations are, different expansions of the Lord. He says, Krishnastu Bhagavan Svayam. Srila Jiva Goswami has identified this phrase, Krishnastu Bhagavan Svayam. That's what he calls the Paribhasha Sutra of the Bhagavatam. In other words, this phrase, this one pada, 1/4 of one verse, 1/2 of a line, this phrase controls the entire 18,000 verses. This is the point that the entire Bhagavatam is meant to make, that Krishna is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. All these different expansions and expansions of expansions and incarnations, they're all magnificent, they're all wonderful, they're all God, they're all different aspects of God. It says, but God himself, God at home, God with his shoes off, that's Krishna. So he's very, very happy to hear that King Parikshit is asking specifically about Krishna, and he winds up his inquiry by saying, because of my vow on the verge of death, I've given up even drinking water. And here he kind of evokes the situation, his own situation. Well, he states quite plainly his situation. I'm on the verge of death, I've given up drinking even water. But that's particularly resonant because the whole situation came about. Why? Because after a long day on the hunt, he was hungry and thirsty. He saw the sage's hermitage, and he approached the sage only to be completely ignored because the sage was too deeply entranced to actually even be aware that King Parikshit was there. And so he responded to his thirst then with a moment of rage. And he picked up this dead snake and he said, oh, you great sage, great Brahmana, we should offer you a wonderful garland. So here, take this garland, the dead old snake. So he's thinking it's quite appropriate that I've given up even drinking water. But he says, still, because I'm drinking the nectar of topics about Krishna, which flows from the lotus mouth of your lordship, my hunger and thirst, which are extremely difficult to bear, as we've seen previously. I'm a Kshatriya after all, even though I'm, in a sense, also a yogi, I'm a great devotee. Still, I'm a Kshatriya, and these urges, when they come, they're really hard to restrain. But still, because I'm drinking the nectar of Krishna Katha, which flows from your lips without cessation, then my hunger and thirst aren't any barrier anymore. I don't even notice them. So, and then Sutta Goswami says, now, oh, no, that's not what I was going to do. I was thinking of also, later in the Bhagavatam, of the questions and answers between King Nimi and the Navyogendras, but I don't see these same kinds of responses. They get right down to brass tacks and answer King Nimi's questions. And I was thinking, in that particular place, that's one of the places where we're 4 levels deep in the nested narratives, right? We have Sutta Goswami telling the sages of Naimisharanya, about Shukadeva Goswami telling Pariksit, about Narada Muni telling Vasudeva, about King Nimi inquiring from the Navyogendras. So that's like 4 layers deep in those nested narratives, which is kind of cool. You have to work a little bit to keep track of that stuff. So Shuka says, his response is, "Oh, Your Majesty, best of all saintly kings, because you're greatly attracted to topics of Vasudeva, it is certain that your intelligence is firmly fixed in spiritual understanding, which is the only true goal for humanity. Because that attraction is unceasing, it is certainly sublime." And then he says, "The Ganges emanating from the toe of Lord Vishnu purifies the 3 worlds, the upper, middle, and lower planetary systems. Similarly, when one asks questions about the pastimes and characteristics of Lord Vasudeva Krishna, 3 varieties of men are purified: the speaker or preacher, he who inquires, and the people in general who listen." I mean, that's just cool. So he's, in the first verse, he thanks him. He kind of congratulates him on the profundity of his question, and then he thanks him because he says, just as we see in today's verse with Maitreya Muni, this is a blessing for everybody. Not just those of us who are here, not just you and me, because here, in this case, it's Maitreya and Vidura. So not just for you and me, but for everybody else who might hear about this conversation. But certainly a blessing for me. And so, he's just as Shukadeva Goswami at the very beginning of the 10th, because now Shukadeva is thinking, okay, now we've really got something to talk about, right? And so he's really excited. He gets so excited that as we see that as we go through the 10th canto, the connections, the flow and the connections are not always chronological, but they're generated, they're determined. The narrative in the 10th canto is shaped by the bhava that Shukadeva Goswami feels as he narrates this. He's so excited. I mean, he goes from, for example, 21st chapter, 22nd chapter maybe, he goes from Krishna stealing the clothes of the young gopis, which is at what time of year? Anybody remember?
October?
Dead of winter. It's cold, right? So dead of winter to all of a sudden, the middle of summer, because all of a sudden the burning rays of the sun, Krishna and his friends are appreciating the shade provided by the cooling shade provided by the trees of Vrindavan in the middle of the summer. So the connections, the flow that we find in the 10th canto is not always chronological, but it's shaped by Shukadeva's bhava, by how his heart responds to Parikit's questions. So he's just really excited here. This is going to be really, really cool. So this is, it's a great boon, a great blessing for devotees when somebody asks them something about Krishna consciousness. And I know I feel the same way when somebody asks me, we're sitting there just kind of like, Grandpa trying to eat his breakfast, trying to gum his breakfast. and one of the devotees, Radhesha, practicing that, or Irina or somebody will sit down and say, well, I got a question. And I'll just say, cool, I hope I have an answer. At least I get to hear the question, and I'm forced to dig a little bit, and it's so nice. And sometimes Irina and I'll sit there and 9:45, 10 o'clock, 10 after 10, and it's still going on. So this is just a great boon. I remember when I was on the mainland, I'd take long drives by myself, which is crazy for an island boy. If it's more than 2 hours, it's a long drive. Especially, if you live on the big island, that's one thing. But on this island, 2 hours, man, you've already been there, right? Because you can't really drive around the whole island. It's not like you can go around Kaina Point to Mokolea and all those places. The Circle Island tour means going through the Eva Basin around the windward side. And then you got to go out the west side, and then you got to go up as far as you can from Mokolea or something. But so we can't really do that. So 2 hours means, I was just there, right? But on the mainland, 2 hours is nothing. Sometimes I had several days drive by myself, which is just strange. But even when